The note was handed to me just minutes before my husband was lowered into the ground. For 38 years, I believed I knew everything about Thomas Keller. We had built a family, a home, and what everyone in our small Ohio town called a perfect marriage. But as I stood beside his casket, a grey-haired woman I had never seen before slipped a folded piece of paper into my trembling hand and whispered, "You deserve to know." When I opened it, I found only one sentence. Ask him why he kept the blue house. My heart stopped, because my husband had never told me about any blue house. And in that moment, surrounded by flowers, prayers, and grieving faces, I began to wonder whether the man I had loved for nearly 4 decades had been hiding an entire life from me. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed the way you saw someone you loved, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And while you're here, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. These conversations remind us we're never truly alone. If stories about family, truth, and second chances speak to your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. If someone had asked me the day before Thomas died whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation. Completely. That was the truth, or at least the truth I believed for nearly 4 decades. My name is Aubrey Keller. I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I thought I had lived a remarkably ordinary life. Not perfect. No marriage is, but good, steady, safe. The kind of marriage younger couples used to admire when they saw us holding hands at church or sitting together at high school football games long after our children had grown up and moved away. Thomas and I met in the summer of 1985. I was 24 and working as a receptionist at a small insurance office in Columbus, Ohio. He was 28, ambitious, charming, and impossible to ignore. I still remember the first thing he ever said to me. "You look like someone who actually listens when people talk." It was an odd compliment, but somehow it worked. 3 months later, we were dating. A year after that, we were married. The early years weren't easy. We had bills, student loans, an old car that broke down every other month, a tiny apartment with a leaking kitchen faucet, but we laughed more than we complained. At night, we'd sit on the floor because we couldn't afford decent furniture and dream about the future. A house, children, retirement, growing old together. Slowly, those dreams became reality. Thomas worked hard and eventually opened his own consulting business. I left my job after our son Ethan was born. 3 years later, our daughter Rebecca arrived. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Soccer practices, school concerts, family vacations to Lake Erie, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper covering the entire living room floor. The years passed faster than either of us expected, and through it all, Thomas remained the center of our family. Reliable, patient, responsible. The man everyone called when something went wrong. When a neighbor needed help repairing a fence, Thomas showed up. When a church fundraiser needed volunteers, Thomas was first to sign up. When my elderly mother became ill, Thomas drove her to appointments without ever complaining. People respected him, trusted him, loved him. I did too, especially me. That's why the note at his funeral felt so impossible, because it wasn't simply questioning my husband. It was questioning the foundation of my entire life. A few days after the funeral, I found myself sitting alone at our kitchen table. The house felt unnaturally quiet. For 38 years, there had always been another person moving through these rooms. Another voice, another set of footsteps. Now there was only silence. I wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The folded note lay beside it. Ask him why he kept the blue house. I must have read those words 100 times. The blue house. What blue house? If Thomas owned another property, surely I would know. We shared finances. We filed taxes together. We planned our retirement together. At least I thought we did. I opened a kitchen drawer and removed an old photo album. Sometimes grief makes you search for comfort in strange places. I began turning pages, wedding photos, birthday parties, family vacations, decades of memories. There was Thomas holding Ethan as a newborn, Thomas teaching Rebecca how to ride a bicycle, Thomas smiling beside me at our 25th wedding anniversary party. Every photograph told the same story. A devoted husband, a loving father, a good man. So why couldn't I stop thinking about that note? As I flipped through the pages, another memory surfaced. A small one. Insignificant, or so I had always believed. About 15 years earlier, Thomas had started taking occasional overnight trips. Nothing unusual. His business sometimes required travel. Whenever I asked where he was going, he always had an answer. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Dayton. Simple explanations. Reasonable explanations. And yet now, sitting alone in the kitchen, I realized something unsettling. I had never once verified any of them. Not because I was careless, because I trusted him. Trust has a strange way of making certain questions feel unnecessary. I continued turning pages. Then another memory surfaced. Several years ago, I had walked into our bedroom while Thomas was ending a phone call. The moment he saw me, he hung up. Quickly, almost nervously. When I asked who it was, he smiled and said it was a client. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? There had been other moments too. Tiny moments. Easy to dismiss. A locked desk drawer. An envelope he quickly tucked away. A bank statement he said contained business information. None of those things felt suspicious at the time. Now they returned one by one like ghosts. For the first time, I wondered whether trust and blindness sometimes looked very similar. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Ethan. My son sounded exhausted. "Mom, how are you holding up?" I hesitated. "I'm managing." "You don't sound convinced." "I'm just thinking." "About Dad?" "About something that happened at the funeral." There was a brief silence, long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then he spoke. "What happened?" I glanced at the note. "A woman gave me a message." "What kind of message?" I told him. Every word. When I finished, the line went quiet again. Too quiet. "Ethan?" "I'm here." "What do you think it means?" His answer came surprisingly fast. "Nothing." "What?" "It sounds like some crazy person trying to upset you." His reaction felt stronger than expected. "Maybe," I said carefully. "But what if there actually is a house?" "Aubrey, stop!" He rarely called me by my first name. The tone caught me off guard. "Dad's gone. You're grieving. People do strange things at funerals." I frowned. "Maybe." "Mum, promise me something." "What?" "Don't start chasing conspiracy theories." I laughed softly. It wasn't funny, but I didn't know what else to do. "I'm not chasing anything." "Good." His voice softened. "Just focus on taking care of yourself." After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Something about that conversation bothered me. Not what Ethan said. How he said it, almost as though he wanted the subject buried immediately. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. After all, grief changes people. Maybe he was hurting too. Maybe I was reading too much into an ordinary conversation. But the feeling wouldn't leave. That evening, I walked into Thomas's study. The room looked exactly as he had left it. His reading glasses sat beside a legal pad. A coffee mug rested near the computer. A jacket hung on the back of his chair. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing, remembering, missing him. Then my eyes drifted toward his desk. And suddenly I remembered something. The bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked. For years I had never questioned it. Now I found myself staring at it, wondering. For the first time in 38 years, I realized I had no idea what was inside. And deep down, a quiet voice whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. Maybe the answer to the blue house had been sitting in this room all along. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of determination. For nearly a week, I had allowed grief to carry me from one day to the next. Friends brought casseroles. Neighbours stopped by with flowers. Church members called to check on me. Everyone treated me like a fragile woman who needed time. Maybe they were right. But the note kept pulling at me. Ask him why he kept the blue house. The words followed me everywhere. Into the kitchen, into the shower, Into my dreams, I couldn't ignore them anymore. After breakfast, I walked into Thomas's study again. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment, I felt guilty, almost as if I were invading his privacy. Then I reminded myself of something important. I wasn't searching through a stranger's belongings. I was searching through my husband's. The man I had shared a life with for 38 years. The man who had promised there would never be secrets between us. I opened the desk drawer where we kept important documents. Insurance policies, tax returns, retirement accounts, nothing unusual. Everything appeared exactly as I expected. Organized, neat, predictable. Just like Thomas. But the locked bottom drawer remained closed. I pulled on the handle. Nothing. Still locked. I searched the desk for a key. No luck. Then I remembered something. Several years earlier, Thomas had installed a small wall safe behind a framed painting. Most couples probably would have shared the combination. We never did. At the time, it hadn't bothered me. He handled most of the financial paperwork. I handled the household. That was simply how our marriage worked. Now, standing in his office, I felt foolish for never asking. I moved the painting aside. The safe was there, locked, silent, waiting. Fortunately, I knew where Thomas kept a notebook containing emergency information. After 20 minutes of searching, I found it inside a filing cabinet. Near the back was a 6-digit code. My hands trembled as I entered the numbers. The safe clicked open. Inside were several folders, a few pieces of jewellery, cash, and something else, a ring of old keys. I stared at them. One key immediately caught my attention. Unlike the others, it looked worn, used, important. Attached to it was a faded blue plastic tag, no writing, no address, just blue. My pulse quickened. I reached deeper into the safe. There, beneath a stack of documents, sat a thin manila folder. The tab simply read, Property. Nothing else. I slowly opened it. The first page was a property tax statement. The address meant nothing to me, but the owner listed at the top certainly did. Thomas Keller. I blinked, then read it again. Thomas Keller. There was no mistake. No misunderstanding. My husband owned another property. A property I had never heard of. A property he had somehow managed to keep hidden for years. I sank into his chair. My knees suddenly felt weak. The room seemed smaller. The air heavier. I continued reading. Annual tax records. Maintenance receipts. Utility payments. Insurance documents. The oldest record dated back more than 20 years. 20 years. 20 years of ownership. 20 years of secrecy. 20 years of lies. Or at least that's what it felt like. I wanted to believe there had to be an explanation. A reasonable one. A harmless one. But another part of me kept asking the obvious question. Why hide it? If there was nothing wrong, why had Thomas never mentioned it? I grabbed my laptop and entered the address. Within seconds, a map appeared. The property sat about 40 minutes from our town, far enough to remain unnoticed, close enough to visit regularly. I switched to satellite view, then street view, and there it was, a small blue house, exactly as the note had described. My stomach tightened. The house looked well maintained, fresh paint, a tidy yard, flower boxes beneath the windows, someone clearly lived there. I zoomed in further, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then my phone rang. Rebecca, my daughter. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she would worry. Hi, sweetheart. Mum, how are you doing today? Honestly? Yeah. I don't know. There was concern in her voice immediately. What happened? I hesitated, then told her everything. The note, the safe, the property records, the blue house. When I finished, she was silent. Unlike Ethan, however, her silence felt thoughtful rather than defensive. Wow, she finally said. That's exactly what I thought. Do you think Dad had another family? The question hit me like a punch. I had been avoiding those words. Another family, another woman, another life. I swallowed hard. I don't know. You should be careful before jumping to conclusions. I know. But what am I supposed to think? Rebecca sighed. I honestly don't know. Neither did I. After hanging up, I spent the next hour staring at the documents. One receipt caught my attention. Monthly utility payments. They were current. Very current. The most recent payment had been made just 6 weeks before Thomas died. Whoever lived there still lived there now. Someone was occupying that house. Someone Thomas had continued supporting until the very end. Then I found another document. A homeowner's insurance policy. My eyes froze on a single line. Primary resident, Hannah Carter. I read the name 3 times. Hannah Carter. Who was Hannah Carter? A tenant? A relative? A daughter? The possibility struck me so suddenly that I felt physically sick. A daughter. What if Thomas had a child he never told me about? What if everything I believed about our marriage was built on half-truths? I pushed back from the desk. No, I needed facts, not assumptions, not theories, facts. I looked again at the address. 40 minutes away, close enough to drive there, close enough to finally get answers. But before I could make any decisions, my phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan. The moment I answered, he spoke. "Mum, where are you?" The question felt oddly specific. "At home." "Good." Something about his tone instantly raised my guard. Why? I was thinking about stopping by. I glanced at the documents spread across Thomas's desk. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah." Another pause. Then, "You haven't gone looking into that house thing, have you?" Every muscle in my body tightened. I hadn't told him about finding the records. I hadn't mentioned the address. Yet somehow he was already asking about the house. Carefully, I replied, "No." He seemed relieved. Far too relieved. "Good." "Ethan." "What? Why are you so worried about it?" Another silence. Longer this time. Then he laughed. A forced laugh. "I'm not worried. I just don't want you upsetting yourself." The answer sounded rehearsed, prepared, wrong. For the first time in my son's life, I felt as though he wasn't telling me the truth. And somehow, that realization frightened me almost as much as the blue house itself. After we ended the call, I sat alone in Thomas's office. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade. The documents remained scattered across the desk. The blue-tagged key rested beside them. Waiting. A question suddenly formed in my mind, not about Thomas, not about Hannah Carter, not even about the blue house. A different question. One I hadn't considered before. Why did Ethan seem so desperate to keep me away from it? As I stared at the address one final time, I made a decision. Tomorrow morning, I would drive to the blue house myself. No more guessing, no more assumptions, no more secrets. Whatever Thomas had hidden for 20 years, I was finally going to uncover it. And deep down, I had the terrifying feeling that once I learned the truth, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the same questions returned. Who was Hannah Carter? Why had Thomas hidden an entire property from me? Why did Ethan seem so uncomfortable whenever the blue house was mentioned? And perhaps, most painfully of all, had my husband been lying to me for decades? At 3 a.m, I found myself standing at the kitchen window, staring into the darkness outside. The house felt unfamiliar now, not because anything had changed physically, because something had changed inside me. For 38 years, I had believed I knew the man sleeping beside me. Now I wasn't even sure I knew the man buried beneath a headstone. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to spend another day wondering. I needed answers. Real answers. Not theories, not guesses. I dressed, made coffee, and sat down one last time in Thomas's study before leaving. Something kept pulling me back to that room, perhaps because it was the last place where pieces of him still felt alive. His scent lingered faintly in the air. His reading glasses remained beside the lamp. His favourite pen still rested neatly on top of a legal pad. For a moment, grief overwhelmed me again. I sat in his chair and cried, not because of the blue house, not because of secrets, because I missed him. Because despite everything, I still loved him. That was what made this so painful. If I had hated Thomas, none of this would have mattered. But I didn't hate him. I loved him. And every new discovery felt like another crack spreading through the foundation of that love. When I stood to leave, something caught my eye. A small leather notebook partially hidden behind several binders on a bookshelf. I had never seen it before. Curious, I pulled it free. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Inside were handwritten notes, appointments, business contacts, meeting reminders. Nothing unusual, until I reached the final section. There, folded between two pages, was an old photograph. I carefully removed it. The image showed a young woman standing beside a white fence. She appeared to be in her late 20s. Dark hair, gentle smile, kind eyes. On the back, written in Thomas's handwriting, were 5 words. Never let her lose everything. My breath caught. The same sentence, almost identical to the note I'd seen attached to the photograph in the safe. My hands began to shake. Who was she? And why had Thomas written those words? I turned the photo over again. This time I noticed something else. A date. May 1998. 28 years ago. Long before Hannah Carter's name had appeared in any document. Long before any of this began. A strange chill ran through me. The woman in the photo wasn't Hannah. She was older, different. Could this be Hannah's mother? I slipped the photograph into my purse. If I was finally going to uncover the truth, I needed every piece of evidence I could find. Then I noticed another item tucked inside the notebook, a folded receipt, property maintenance services, Bluebird Property Management. The service address matched the blue house, but one detail stood out. Emergency contact, Margaret Carter. My heart skipped. Carter. The same last name as Hannah. Finally, a connection. Margaret Carter. Whoever she was, she had clearly played a major role in this story. And somehow Thomas had spent decades making sure she, and later Hannah, never lost that house. The question was, why? 30 minutes later, I was on the road. The drive felt longer than it actually was. Fields rolled past my window. Small farms. Country churches. Gas stations. Everything looked normal. Yet inside me, nothing felt normal anymore. As I drove, memories kept resurfacing. Thomas laughing during family vacations. Thomas helping Ethan build a treehouse. Thomas dancing with me in our kitchen when we thought nobody was watching. Could that man truly have betrayed me? I wanted to say no. But evidence didn't care about feelings. Evidence only cared about facts. And the facts were becoming harder to ignore. When my GPS announced I was 5 minutes away, my stomach twisted into knots. I almost turned around. Part of me wasn't ready. Part of me preferred uncertainty over a painful truth. But another part needed closure, needed answers, needed to know whether my marriage had been real. Finally, I turned onto a quiet country road lined with maple trees. And then I saw it. The blue house. It was exactly as it appeared online. Small, charming, beautifully maintained. Blue shutters, white trim, flower gardens blooming along the front walkway. It looked less like a secret hideaway and more like a place someone genuinely loved. I parked across the street. For several minutes, I simply stared, trying to gather courage, trying to prepare myself for whatever waited inside. Then the front door opened. My heart nearly stopped. A young woman stepped outside. She looked to be around 28, dark blonde hair, jeans, a simple sweater. Nothing about her appearance suggested scandal or deception. She looked ordinary, normal, human, not the villain I had imagined. She carried a watering can and began tending flowers near the porch. For reasons I couldn't explain, that unsettled me even more. Because real life rarely resembles the dramatic stories we invent in our heads. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. The woman looked up. When our eyes met, confusion crossed her face. I suddenly felt ridiculous. What exactly was I going to say? Hello, I think my dead husband may have hidden you from me for 20 years. Before I could decide, she spoke first. Can I help you? Her voice was calm, polite, friendly. I swallowed hard. My name is Aubrey Keller. The watering can slipped slightly in her hands. The colour drained from her face immediately, as though she recognized the name, as though she had been expecting this day for years. For several seconds, Neither of us moved. Then she whispered something that sent a shock through my entire body. "Aubrey?" I nodded slowly. She stared at me, not with guilt, not with fear, but with sadness, deep sadness, the kind that comes from carrying a burden too long. "You should come inside," she said quietly. Every warning bell in my head began ringing, yet somehow I followed her. The interior of the house was warm and welcoming. Family photographs decorated the walls, bookshelves lined the living room. A quilt rested neatly across the couch. Nothing about the space suggested a secret romance. Nothing. Then my eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting atop a fireplace. The woman from the old picture. The one I'd found in Thomas's notebook. Margaret Carter. Older now, but unmistakably the same person. I slowly approached the photograph, my pulse hammered in my ears. "Who is she?" I asked. The young woman looked at the picture, then back at me. "My mother." The room suddenly felt very still, very quiet, very important. I turned toward her. "And you are Hannah Carter," she nodded. "Yes." The confirmation sent a wave of emotions crashing through me. Anger, relief, confusion, fear. For weeks, Hannah Carter had existed only as a name on documents. Now she was standing right in front of me. A real person. A real mystery. I took a slow breath, then asked the question that had haunted me since the funeral. "What exactly was your relationship with Thomas Keller?" Hannah's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. Instead, she looked directly at me and said something I never expected. "Thomas Keller wasn't my father." I stared at her, completely stunned. She continued, "And he wasn't my mother's lover either." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Everything I had believed, everything I had feared, everything I had prepared myself to hear. Gone, destroyed in a single sentence. Then Hannah said something even more shocking. He was the man who spent 25 years trying to make up for the worst mistake of his life. And suddenly, I realized this story was far bigger than an affair, far bigger than a secret child, far bigger than anything I had imagined. For several seconds, I simply stared at Hannah. My mind struggled to process what she had just said. Thomas wasn't her father. He wasn't her mother's lover. Then why had he hidden this house? Why had he spent decades paying for it? Why had he never told me any of this? Most importantly, what was the worst mistake of his life? Hannah motioned toward the couch. "You should sit down." I wasn't sure whether I wanted to sit or run, but my legs felt weak, so I lowered myself onto the edge of the sofa. Hannah sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It felt heavy. As if both of us understood that whatever happened next would change the way I viewed my husband forever. Finally, I spoke. "How long have you known who I am?" Hannah looked down at her hands. "Almost my entire life." The answer stunned me. "What?" "My mother told me about you." I blinked. "She did?" Hannah nodded. "She said you were a good woman." A strange ache formed in my chest. The woman whose name had haunted me for days had apparently known about me all along, yet I had never known she existed. Did Thomas tell her about me? All the time? I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt betrayed, because every answer seemed to create two new questions. Hannah rose and walked toward a bookshelf. After a moment, she returned carrying a worn photo album. She placed it carefully on the coffee table. "This is where the story starts." My heart pounded. Slowly she opened the album. The first photographs were old, very old. Hospital photographs, staff gatherings, holiday parties, people wearing medical uniforms. Then I saw him, Thomas, much younger, dark hair, bright smile, probably in his early 30s, standing beside a woman I immediately recognized, Margaret Carter, the woman from the photograph, the woman whose picture Thomas had hidden in his notebook. They appeared to be friends, nothing more, just co-workers posing together. I looked up. They worked together. Hannah nodded. At Mercy General Hospital. I frowned. Thomas never worked in a hospital. He wasn't employed there. She paused. He served on the hospital's board of directors for several years. I vaguely remembered that. It had been decades ago, one of many community positions Thomas had held while building his reputation. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, at least not then. Hannah turned another page. More photographs, fundraisers, charity events, community meetings. Thomas and Margaret appeared in many of them, never alone, always surrounded by others. Still nothing romantic, still nothing that explained the blue house. Then Hannah closed the album. Aubrey, before I tell you the rest, I need you to understand something. What? My mother never hated Thomas. That surprised me. Considering everything I had discovered, hatred would have made sense. Instead, Hannah's voice carried compassion, almost affection. He spent most of his life trying to help us. Why? The question came out sharper than I intended. Hannah lowered her eyes. Because he believed he ruined hers. The room fell silent again. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the house. Each second felt louder than the last. Then Hannah stood. There's something I need to show you. She walked toward a hallway. After a moment, she disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a small cardboard box. The edges were worn, the lid faded with age. Carefully, she set it in front of me. My mother wanted you to see this one day. My breath caught. Me? Yes. Slowly, I removed the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, some sealed, some opened, some yellowed with age. Every single one addressed to Margaret Carter, and every single one signed by Thomas Keller. I looked at Hannah. Oh my God. She nodded quietly. He wrote to her for years. My hands trembled as I picked up the first letter. The date shocked me. 27 years earlier. I carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas's. The opening line made my chest tighten. Margaret, I know saying sorry no longer means much, but I cannot live with myself if I stop trying. I stared at the words. Read them again. Then again. There was no mistaking the guilt pouring from every sentence. Thomas wasn't writing like a man hiding an affair. He was writing like a man carrying a burden that never left him. I continued reading. By the second page, tears blurred my vision. The letter never explained the original event, not directly, but it revealed something important. Thomas blamed himself, completely, obsessively, for something that had happened to Margaret, something devastating, something permanent. I set the letter down. What happened? Hannah's eyes filled with emotion. My mother never told me every detail. Frustration flared inside me. Then what do you know? She hesitated, then answered. I know there was an investigation. My stomach tightened. An investigation? At the hospital. The words landed heavily. Suddenly every piece of the puzzle seemed darker, more serious, more dangerous. Hannah continued. My mother discovered financial irregularities. I frowned. What kind of irregularities? Money disappearing from hospital programs. I stared at her. This was becoming very different from what I expected. Was Thomas involved? Indirectly. The answer only confused me further. Hannah took a deep breath. My mother reported concerns to several people. I waited. One of those people was Thomas. The room seemed to grow colder. I remembered Thomas's reputation, his integrity, his community leadership. The idea of him being involved in corruption felt impossible. Yet the evidence in front of me kept proving that I didn't know everything about my husband. What happened next? I asked. Hannah swallowed. My mother became the whistleblower. The word hit me hard. Whistleblower. Suddenly the stakes felt much higher, far beyond secret houses and hidden money, far beyond family drama. This was about someone's life being destroyed. My mother thought she was doing the right thing. Hannah's voice cracked. But when the investigation became public, powerful people needed someone to blame. I sat frozen, unable to look away. Margaret lost her position. My chest tightened. She was fired? Yes, The pain in Hannah's voice was unmistakable. She couldn't find another job for years. I closed my eyes. The picture was beginning to form, not completely, but enough to see tragedy, enough to see suffering, enough to understand why Thomas might have felt guilty. Still, one question remained. What was Thomas's role? Hannah looked directly at me. For the first time since I arrived, fear appeared in her eyes. Real fear. As if even now she struggled to speak the truth. Then she whispered, "My mother believed Thomas accidentally gave confidential information to the wrong person." I stared at her. What? He trusted someone he shouldn't have trusted. The room fell silent again. My pulse thundered in my ears. One mistake, one conversation, one decision, and somehow it had destroyed a woman's future. Suddenly, Thomas's letters made sense. The guilt, the secrecy, the decades of support, the blue house. But another realization struck me. If Hannah was telling the truth, then Thomas hadn't simply hidden a property from me. He had hidden 25 years of remorse. 25 years of trying to repair damage he believed he caused. And I had never known any of it. Not once. I looked down at the box of letters. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. A lifetime of apologies. A lifetime of regret. A lifetime my husband had carried alone. Then Hannah quietly said something that sent another chill through my body. "Aubrey, there's a reason Ethan didn't want you coming here." My head snapped up. What does Ethan have to do with this? Hannah's expression changed. The sadness remained. But now there was something else. Concern. Serious concern. And when she spoke again, her words made my stomach drop. "Because your son came here 3 months before Thomas died." For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. "My son?" I asked. Hannah nodded. "Ethan?" The room seemed to shrink around me. Of all the things I had expected to hear that day, that wasn't one of them, not even close. I had come looking for answers about Thomas. Instead, I was suddenly facing questions about my own son. "What do you mean he came here?" Hannah sat back slowly. "He drove out here one afternoon in March." March. 3 months before Thomas died. My mind immediately began calculating dates. At that time, Thomas had already been battling heart problems. His health was declining. He had been visiting doctors more frequently, yet he never mentioned Ethan visiting this house. Never once. "What happened?" I asked. Hannah hesitated. The hesitation worried me. Because people pause when they're deciding how much truth to reveal, not whether to reveal it. How much? He wasn't friendly. My stomach tightened. Define not friendly. A sad smile crossed Hannah's face. "You really want the honest version?" "Yes," she nodded. "He demanded that I leave." I froze. "What?" "He said the house should be sold." The words hit me like a punch. I stared at her, unable to reconcile what I was hearing with the son I had raised, the son who used to rescue injured birds, the son who cried when our family dog died, the son who once gave half his allowance to a struggling classmate. That Ethan. "He wanted you gone?" Hannah nodded. "He said his father had wasted enough money." I felt something twist painfully inside my chest. Did Thomas know? Yes. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. "He arrived about 20 minutes later." I blinked. "What?" "He came here after Ethan." Now my pulse was racing. The image formed instantly in my mind, father and son, standing in this very house, arguing, fighting, about something Thomas had hidden for decades. What happened? Hannah looked toward the window, as though replaying the memory. "They argued on the front porch." The room fell silent again. I could almost see it. Thomas standing where I had stood earlier. Older now, sicker, tired yet determined. Ethan angry, frustrated, demanding answers, demanding money, demanding control. What were they arguing about? The house, of course. Everything came back to the house. Hannah continued. Ethan wanted it sold. Why? The answer came before she even opened her mouth. Money. I already knew it, but I needed to hear it. He was starting some investment project. There it was. Money. Always money. He believed the property should belong to the family. A bitter laugh escaped me. The family. The irony was almost unbearable. For decades, Thomas had been quietly helping another family because he believed he owed them a debt, and now his own son wanted to erase all evidence of it. Hannah opened a drawer beside the couch. After a moment, she removed a small folder. When she handed it to me, I immediately noticed it contained printed pages. What is this? Something Thomas told me to keep. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was a text message screenshot. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Ethan. I read the message. You need to understand something. When my father is gone, this arrangement ends. I blinked, then continued. The next message was worse. The property belongs to our family, not yours. Then another. Take whatever money you've been getting and move on. My chest tightened painfully. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Not because I thought Ethan was perfect, no child is, but because the cruelty felt so unlike the boy I remembered. Or perhaps it wasn't unlike him anymore. Maybe I had simply stopped seeing who he had become. I lowered the papers. When did he send these? Over several months. I closed my eyes. A heavy sadness settled over me. Not anger. Not yet. Sadness. The kind of sadness only a parent can feel. Because no matter how old your children become, a part of you always remembers who they once were. The little boy who ran into your arms, the teenager who needed advice, the young man you believed would grow into someone kind. Seeing those messages felt like mourning another loss. Not just Thomas, Ethan too. Hannah quietly poured 2 cups of coffee. When she handed me one, I noticed her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from emotion. She was reliving these events too. Thomas was furious, she said softly. When? The day he saw the messages. I looked up. He saw them? All of them. A strange feeling washed over me, relief. For the first time since this ordeal began, I found comfort in knowing Thomas had defended her. Whatever his mistakes had been, he hadn't abandoned responsibility. He hadn't walked away. What did he do? Hannah smiled sadly. He told Ethan the house wasn't negotiable. That sounded exactly like Thomas. Calm, firm, final. No yelling, no threats, just certainty. I could practically hear his voice. No, son, this isn't up for discussion. Hannah looked toward a photograph sitting on the mantel, a photograph of her mother. That was the last major argument they ever had. My stomach tightened. When was that? About 10 weeks before Thomas died. 10 weeks. Not long at all. Suddenly, another thought occurred to me, one that made my pulse quicken. Ethan knew. Hannah frowned. Knew what? About all of this. The realization landed with terrifying clarity. The Blue House, the Carter family, Thomas's involvement, the financial support. Ethan knew. Perhaps not everything, but enough. Far more than he'd admitted. Which meant something else. Every conversation we'd had after the funeral had been dishonest. Every warning, every attempt to stop me, every effort to convince me the note meant nothing. He had known, all along. A deep sense of betrayal settled over me. Not because of Thomas, because of my son. I thought back to our phone call. Don't chase conspiracy theories, don't upset yourself, let it go. Those weren't the words of someone confused. They were the words of someone trying to keep a secret buried, the same way Thomas had, only for very different reasons. Hannah suddenly stood. There's one more thing. The seriousness in her voice immediately caught my attention. What is it? She disappeared down the hallway. When she returned, she carried a sealed envelope. Unlike the letters, this envelope looked newer, much newer. My name was written across the front. Aubrey Keller. I stared at it. Every nerve in my body seemed to awaken. What is this? Hannah swallowed. Thomas left it here. The world seemed to stop. My eyes locked onto the envelope. My name. His handwriting. My husband. speaking to me from beyond the grave. He told me that if anything happened to him before he could explain everything himself, her voice cracked, I should give this to you. I reached for the envelope. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped it, because deep down I knew something. The letters had told me about Margaret. The documents had told me about the house. The text messages had told me about Ethan. But whatever was inside this envelope, it contained the truth Thomas had never found the courage to tell me while he was alive. And for the first time since receiving that mysterious note at his funeral, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to know it. I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity. My name was written in Thomas's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled birthday cards, anniversary notes, Christmas gifts, little reminders tucked into my purse before difficult days. Seeing it now felt almost unbearable, because this wasn't another receipt, or another document, or another clue. This was Thomas, speaking directly to me, one final time. The room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Hannah sat quietly across from me, giving me space. She understood something I was only beginning to realize. Once I opened that envelope, there would be no going back, no more wondering, no more imagining, only truth. And truth has a way of changing everything. Taking a deep breath, I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter, several pages long. I immediately recognized the opening words. My dearest Aubrey. Tears filled my eyes before I could read another line. For a moment I couldn't continue, because suddenly, he didn't feel gone. He felt close, painfully close. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. If you are holding this letter, then I waited too long. I always believed there would be more time. More time to explain. More time to tell you the truth. More time to find the courage I should have found years ago. But life does not always give us the time we think we have. My hands tightened around the paper. That sounded exactly like Thomas. Always careful, always thoughtful, always trying to carry burdens himself. I continued, before you read anything else, I need you to know one thing. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Not once in 38 years. A tear slipped down my cheek. I hated how much those words still mattered. After everything I had discovered, after all the secrets, part of me still desperately wanted to believe him. The letter continued. What happened with Margaret Carter was never an affair. I know that is what many people would assume. Perhaps that is what you assume too. But the truth is both simpler and more painful. I closed my eyes briefly. Even though Hannah had already told me that, seeing Thomas write it himself felt different, more real, more final. When I first met Margaret, she was one of the most honourable people I had ever known. She believed in doing the right thing even when it came at great personal cost. Unfortunately, I was not always as brave as she was. My heart sank. The next paragraph changed everything. 26 years ago, Margaret discovered financial misconduct involving several individuals connected to the hospital board. When she came to me, she trusted me. She believed I would help her do the right thing. Instead, I made the worst mistake of my life. I stopped breathing. Every word seemed heavier than the last. I kept reading. I shared information with someone I believed I could trust. A man who assured me he would handle the matter discreetly. I was wrong. Within days, Margaret's concerns became public. The people involved protected themselves. They needed a scapegoat, and Margaret became that scapegoat. My stomach twisted painfully. I remembered what Hannah had said. One mistake, one conversation, one decision, a life destroyed, Thomas continued. I will spend the rest of eternity regretting that decision. Margaret lost her career, her reputation, her financial security. People abandoned her. Friends disappeared. Doors closed. And although I did not commit the crimes, I helped create the circumstances that allowed others to destroy her life. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Not because I believed Thomas was evil, because I could hear the guilt in every sentence. a guilt he had apparently carried for more than 2 decades. The next section revealed even more. Several years later, Margaret became seriously ill. She was struggling financially and emotionally. By then, I had already spent years trying to help anonymously, but eventually she learned where the assistance was coming from. When we finally spoke honestly, she told me something I never forgot. She said that guilt alone helps no one. Only action does. I lowered the page for a moment. That sounded like Margaret. Strong, practical, compassionate. The kind of woman who could survive hardship without becoming bitter. The letter continued. The blue house was purchased shortly afterward. Margaret refused direct financial support. She would not accept charity. So we created an arrangement. The house would always belong to her family. No matter what happened, no matter how difficult life became, no matter how many years passed. I looked around the living room, the photographs, the flowers, the warmth of the home. Suddenly everything made sense. This house wasn't a secret love nest. It wasn't evidence of betrayal. It was a promise Thomas had spent 25 years keeping. I continued reading. The hardest part was never helping Margaret. The hardest part was hiding it from you. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. The sentence that hurt more than anything else. I kept reading. Every year I intended to tell you. Every year I convinced myself I would explain everything soon. And every year I failed. At first I feared you would misunderstand. Later I feared you would feel betrayed. Eventually I became afraid that the truth would damage the life we had built together. So I remained silent. And that silence became its own kind of dishonesty. I felt tears running freely now, because he was right. The secrecy itself had become a betrayal. Even if his intentions were honourable, even if his reasons were understandable, marriage cannot survive entirely on good intentions. It also requires truth. And Thomas had denied me that truth. The final pages were the hardest. If you are reading this, then Hannah has likely told you about Ethan. My pulse immediately quickened. I read faster. Please do not blame yourself. The choices Ethan made belong to Ethan, not to you, not to me, not to anyone else. I love our son. I always will. But I became increasingly concerned about the man he was becoming. My chest tightened. Thomas had seen it too. The greed, the entitlement, the anger, all of it. The letter continued. Several months ago, Ethan demanded that I sell the house. When I refused, he accused me of caring more about strangers than family. Perhaps there is some truth in that accusation. But what he never understood is that keeping my promise to Margaret was not choosing strangers over family. It was choosing integrity. I stared at those words. Choosing integrity. The phrase echoed through my mind because suddenly I understood something. This wasn't really about a house, or money, or even guilt. It was about the kind of person Thomas wanted to be before he died, a man who finally honoured his commitments, a man who refused to abandon someone he had wronged. Then I reached the final paragraph, the one that completely shattered me. Aubrey, if there is one thing I ask, it is this. Please do not let my mistakes destroy the good years we shared. Judge me honestly, not as a perfect man, because I was never that. Judge me as a flawed man who loved you deeply, failed you badly, and spent the rest of his life trying to become better than the man he once was. I love you. I always will. Thomas. The room fell silent. I lowered the letter slowly. For several moments, neither Hannah nor I spoke. I couldn't. My heart felt too heavy, too full, too broken, because for the first time since the funeral, I finally understood the truth. Thomas hadn't been living a secret second life. He had been carrying a secret wound, one he never found the courage to share with me. But as I sat there trying to process everything, Hannah quietly said something that instantly changed the direction of my thoughts. Aubrey. I looked up. There was one thing Thomas never told you in that letter. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Hannah hesitated. Then she looked toward the hallway, toward another room in the house. And when she spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Because there was someone else involved. In what happened to my mother. My stomach dropped. Someone else. Not just Thomas. Not just Margaret. Someone else. And suddenly I realized the story wasn't over. Not even close. The letter trembled in my hands. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I had just spent the last hour watching my understanding of Thomas transform completely. The man I believed had betrayed me had instead spent decades carrying guilt. The secret house wasn't a monument to infidelity. It was a promise he had refused to break. And now, Hannah was telling me there was more. Someone else. Another person connected to Margaret's downfall. Another piece of the story Thomas had never shared. My heart began pounding again. What do you mean someone else was involved? Hannah looked uneasy, not frightened, conflicted, as if she had struggled with this information for years. My mother didn't talk about it often. Then how do you know? Because she kept records. The word records immediately caught my attention. Not memories. Not stories. Records. Evidence. Facts. Hannah stood and walked toward a narrow cabinet near the fireplace. After unlocking a drawer, she carefully removed a thick binder. The edges were worn from age. The cover was faded. This wasn't something recently assembled. It had been preserved. Protected. For years. She returned and placed it on the coffee table. My mother started collecting documents after the investigation. Slowly, she opened it. The first section contained newspaper clippings, local headlines, hospital controversy, financial review, administrative restructuring. Most of the articles were nearly impossible to read without a magnifying glass. But one thing stood out immediately. Margaret's name appeared repeatedly. Not as a hero, not as a whistleblower, but as a problem. A troublemaker. A disgruntled employee. I felt anger rising inside me. History had treated her unfairly. That much was obvious. The next section contained correspondence, legal letters, employment records, appeals, rejections, one after another. Each document painted the same picture. A woman desperately trying to rebuild her life and repeatedly being denied the opportunity. I looked at Hannah. She saved all of this. Hannah nodded. She wanted the truth documented. That sounded wise. The kind of wisdom people develop only after being hurt deeply. Then Hannah turned several more pages and suddenly stopped. This is what I wanted to show you. I leaned forward. At first glance, the document appeared ordinary. A meeting summary. 26 years old. Typed. Official. Boring. Then I saw a name. My pulse quickened. Another name. And another. Board members, administrators, hospital executives. Several individuals connected to the original investigation. I frowned. What am I looking at? Hannah pointed toward a highlighted paragraph. I read carefully, then read it again. And again. Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The document referenced an internal discussion held before Margaret was publicly blamed. A discussion involving multiple decision-makers. Not just Thomas. Several people had known she was being unfairly targeted. Several people had chosen to remain silent, including one name that appeared repeatedly throughout the binder. Charles Whitmore. The name felt familiar. Very familiar. Then it hit me. Whitmore. Daniel Whitmore. Thomas's attorney. The attorney handling the estate. The attorney who had been Thomas's closest friend for decades. My eyes widened. Whitmore? Hannah nodded slowly. My mother believed he knew more than he admitted. I stared at her. The implications were enormous. For days I had viewed Daniel Whitmore as a neutral figure, a trusted family lawyer, a longtime friend, a man helping settle Thomas's affairs. Now his name appeared directly inside Margaret's records, connected to the very event that had changed her life. Did Thomas know this? Hannah hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He eventually did. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Eventually? Not immediately. My stomach tightened. Another layer. Another secret. Another truth buried for decades. I looked down at the documents. Suddenly, I wasn't just investigating a hidden house. I was investigating a chain of decisions stretching back more than 25 years, a chain that had affected multiple lives, including my own. Hannah quietly folded her hands. My mother never blamed Thomas the same way she blamed the others. That surprised me. Why? Because Thomas spent the rest of his life trying to fix what happened. Fair point. No one could read those letters and doubt his remorse. But she believed other people escaped responsibility. I stared at the binder. And Whitmore was one of them? I think so. Think. Not know. The distinction mattered. I wasn't interested in assumptions anymore. I needed facts. Still, the discovery unsettled me because Daniel Whitmore was about to become very important. In a few days, he was scheduled to review Thomas's estate, his will, his financial records, everything. And suddenly, I wasn't sure whether I trusted him. The thought made me uncomfortable. Not because I liked Daniel, because I had known him for nearly 30 years. He attended family dinners, birthday celebrations, graduation parties. He and Thomas played golf together. He sent Christmas cards. If Hannah was right, then one of two things had to be true. Either Daniel had hidden part of the truth, or Margaret had misunderstood his role. I wasn't prepared to decide which. Not yet. My eyes drifted toward another section of the binder. Photographs. Dozens of them. Most were ordinary. Community events, hospital fundraisers, charity dinners. Then one image caught my attention. I immediately recognized the people. Thomas, Daniel Whitmore, several hospital officials, and standing near the edge of the group. A much younger Ethan. I frowned. Ethan? Hannah leaned forward. Which picture? I showed her. She studied it briefly, then nodded. Your son came here once and showed me that photograph. A chill ran through me. He did? Yes. My pulse quickened. When? Shortly before Thomas died. The now familiar feeling returned, the realization that Ethan knew more than he admitted, far more. I pointed at the photograph. Why was he interested in this? Hannah looked uncomfortable again, because the answer wasn't simple. Finally, she spoke. He was trying to understand why his father cared so much about my family. I considered that. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, but something felt wrong. Incomplete. What aren't you telling me? Hannah lowered her gaze. For several moments she said nothing, then she quietly reached for another folder. This one looked newer. Much newer. She slid it across the table. My stomach tightened. I opened it. Inside were copies of emails. Recent emails. Not decades old. Recent. The sender's name made my heart sink. Ethan Keller. I scanned the first page. Then the second. Then the third. With every line, my disappointment deepened. The emails weren't about understanding. They were about money, property value, ownership rights, tax implications, possible sale options. My son wasn't trying to uncover family history. He was calculating profits. The realization hurt more than I expected, because somewhere deep inside, I had still been making excuses for him, still believing there was another explanation. Another side to the story, but the emails painted a different picture, one that was difficult to ignore. I looked up slowly. How long has he been contacting you? Almost a year. A year. My chest tightened. A year of conversations, a year of secrets, a year of pressure, and not once had Ethan mentioned any of it. Not to me. Not to Rebecca. Not to anyone. The silence between us stretched. Finally, Hannah spoke. Aubrey, there's something else. I almost laughed. At this point, it felt impossible that there could be anything else, but there always was. Every answer led to another question. Every discovery opened another door. What now? Hannah took a deep breath, then looked directly into my eyes. The last conversation Thomas and Ethan ever had, she stopped. The hesitation immediately alarmed me. What about it? Her voice became barely audible. It wasn't about the house? A cold sensation moved through my chest. If it wasn't about the house, what was it about? Hannah swallowed, then answered. It was about Thomas changing his will. The words hit me like a thunderclap. Changing his will. Suddenly everything connected. Ethan's panic, the pressure, the secrecy, the urgency. The Blue House wasn't the only thing at stake. There was something else. Something involving Thomas's estate. And judging by the expression on Hannah's face, something had happened shortly before his death that no one in my family knew about. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. It was about Thomas changing his will. For several seconds, I simply stared at Hannah. My husband's will. The document that would determine what happened after his death. The document Daniel Whitmore would soon read before the family. The document Ethan seemed strangely obsessed with. Suddenly, everything felt connected. The Blue House, the arguments, the emails, the pressure, the lies, all of it. I slowly placed the folder back on the table. What exactly happened? Hannah folded her hands together. The last time Ethan came here, he wasn't angry at me. I frowned. Then who was he angry at? Thomas. That didn't surprise me, not anymore. What happened? Hannah looked toward the window as if replaying the memory. It was about 6 weeks before Thomas died. 6 weeks. Close enough that the conversation would still have been fresh in Thomas's mind. He showed up unexpectedly. I listened carefully. Thomas was already here. Visiting you? Yes. That made sense. Based on everything I had learned, Thomas visited regularly. Not because of romance, not because of a secret family, because of responsibility, because of guilt, because of a promise. Hannah continued. Ethan arrived about 20 minutes later. My stomach tightened. What did he want? She gave a humorless laugh. The same thing he'd always wanted. Money. I already knew the answer before she spoke, but hearing it still hurt. He wanted the property sold. I nodded slowly. And Thomas refused. Immediately. That sounded like my husband. Once Thomas made a decision, changing his mind was nearly impossible, especially when he believed he was doing the right thing. What happened next? Hannah hesitated, then answered. They started arguing. The room felt very quiet. I could almost hear their voices, father and son. Years of tension finally spilling out. Ethan told Thomas he was choosing strangers over family. My chest tightened. The same accusation Thomas had mentioned in his letter. So it was true. It had happened exactly as he described. What did Thomas say? A faint smile appeared on Hannah's face. He told Ethan something I've never forgotten. I leaned forward. What? Hannah's eyes softened. He said, character is what you do when keeping your promise becomes inconvenient. My breath caught. That sounded exactly like Thomas. Wise, simple, painfully honest. For a brief moment I could hear his voice. I could see him standing there, older, tired, but unwilling to abandon what he believed was right. Then Hannah's expression darkened. But Ethan didn't stop. Of course he didn't. What happened? He accused Thomas of hiding money. I sighed. That sounded like Ethan too, always calculating. Always looking at situations through a financial lens. He believed there was more money involved than there actually was. Was there? No. The answer came immediately. The house was modest. The support wasn't extravagant. That didn't surprise me. Nothing about this place suggested wealth. It suggested stability, security, a promise being honoured, not luxury. Then Hannah looked directly at me. Eventually the argument changed. My stomach tightened again. Changed how? It stopped being about the house. There it was. The same thing she had hinted at earlier. The real reason behind the confrontation. What did it become about? For several seconds she didn't answer. Then she quietly said, Thomas's will. A chill ran through me. Even hearing the words again felt unsettling. What about it? Ethan knew Thomas was planning to make changes. I stared at her. How? I don't know. That answer frustrated me, but at least she was honest. I just know they argued about it. I thought about that. Thomas had been meticulous with legal matters. Careful, private. The idea that Ethan somehow learned about changes to the will suggested one thing. He had been paying attention, very close attention, closer than I realized. What kind of changes? Hannah shook her head. Thomas never told me specifics. My pulse slowed slightly. At least that mystery remained unresolved. Then she added something that made it race again. But he did say one thing. I waited. He said he couldn't leave important decisions in Ethan's hands. The room seemed to grow colder, not because I was shocked, because deep down I wasn't. The last few days had forced me to confront a painful truth. The son I loved wasn't the same person he had once been. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. Or perhaps it had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. The ambition, the entitlement, the hunger for control. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Hannah continued. Thomas seemed heartbroken. That hurt to hear, because I knew exactly what she meant. Parents expect disappointment from strangers, not from their children. When disappointment comes from someone you've loved their entire life, it cuts deeper, far deeper. I looked around the room, at the photographs, at the letters, at the evidence of decades spent trying to make things right, and suddenly I understood something. Thomas wasn't protecting the house from Ethan. He was protecting a promise he considered more important than money, more important than convenience, perhaps even more important than his own reputation. For the first time since discovering the blue house, I felt something unexpected. Respect. Not complete forgiveness. Not yet. But respect. Because carrying that burden for 25 years couldn't have been easy. Then Hannah stood and walked toward a small desk near the hallway. When she returned, she carried a digital voice recorder. My eyes immediately narrowed. What is that? She swallowed. Something Thomas left here. Again. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle. What is on it? Her expression became serious. Part of the conversation. My heart nearly stopped. The argument? She nodded. I stared at the recorder. A recording. Actual proof. Not memories. Not interpretations. Proof. The thought made me nervous, because recordings don't care about feelings. They reveal exactly what happened. No filters, no excuses, no revisions. Have you listened to it? Yes? And? Hannah hesitated. The hesitation told me everything. Whatever was on that recording mattered. A lot. Finally, she answered. I think you should hear it yourself. My pulse thundered in my ears. The recorder suddenly felt heavier than anything else in the room, because somewhere inside it were my husband's voice and my son's voice. Possibly their final major conversation. Possibly the last time they ever truly confronted each other. I wasn't sure I was ready. But I also knew I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything. Slowly, Hannah placed the recorder on the coffee table between us. Neither of us touched it. For several moments, we simply stared at it. Then my phone rang. The sound startled both of us. I glanced at the screen and immediately froze. The caller ID displayed a familiar name. Daniel Whitmore, Thomas's attorney. The same man whose name appeared in Margaret's old documents. The same man scheduled to review the will. The same man who might know far more than he'd ever admitted. My pulse quickened, because the timing felt impossible, almost as if he somehow knew I was here. I answered, "Hello?" Daniel's voice sounded calm, professional, but beneath it I sensed urgency. "Aubrey, I've been trying to reach you." I glanced at Hannah. "Why?" A pause. Then, "We need to meet as soon as possible." Every instinct in my body went on alert. "About what?" Another pause, longer this time. And when Daniel finally answered, his words sent a chill through my entire body. Thomas made changes to his will shortly before he died. I gripped the phone tighter. The room suddenly felt very still, because for the second time that day someone had mentioned the will. And deep down I knew whatever Thomas had changed was about to affect every person connected to this story, including me. I tightened my grip on the phone. Across from me, Hannah watched silently. Daniel Whitmore's words echoed in my mind. Thomas made changes to his will shortly before he died. For a moment, I couldn't decide which disturbed me more, the fact that Thomas had changed the will, or the fact that Ethan seemed to know about it before anyone else. "Why do we need to meet?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Just long enough for me to notice. I'd rather explain in person." My stomach tightened. That answer might have satisfied me a week ago, not anymore. "Daniel." My voice was firmer than I intended. "What aren't you telling me?" The silence on the line stretched. Finally, he sighed. "Aubrey, there are several things regarding Thomas's estate that need clarification." Clarification. Lawyers loved words like that. Careful words. Safe words. Words that revealed almost nothing. "Is Ethan aware of these changes?" Another pause. That pause told me more than any answer could have. "Daniel?" "Yes." My heart sank. Of course he knew. Somehow, Ethan always seemed one step ahead. "When can you meet?" Daniel asked. "Tomorrow." "Good." His relief sounded genuine. Too genuine. As if he had been worried I might refuse. After we ended the call, I slowly lowered the phone. Neither Hannah nor I spoke immediately. Finally, she asked, "What did he want?" I looked down at the recorder sitting between us, then back at her. "The will?" Her expression darkened. "Of course." The words came out almost bitter. I frowned. "You don't trust him." It wasn't a question. Hannah hesitated, then answered carefully. "I don't know if I trust anyone connected to what happened 25 years ago." Fair enough. I couldn't blame her for that. Not after everything her family had endured. Still, I wasn't ready to accuse Daniel of anything. Not yet. The evidence wasn't there. Only questions. And I had learned the hard way that assumptions can be dangerous. I stood. "I should go." Hannah nodded. Before I could leave, however, she picked up the voice recorder. "You forgot this." I stared at it. The last conversation. Thomas, Ethan. The truth. My pulse quickened. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You will be." Then she placed the recorder into my hand. And somehow, that simple gesture felt heavier than any box of documents. Because the truth was no longer hidden. The truth was coming home with me. The drive back felt different from the drive there. That morning I had believed I was investigating a possible affair, a secret family, a hidden life. Instead, I had discovered something far more complicated. A mistake. A promise. 25 years of guilt. And a son who seemed increasingly determined to profit from all of it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I wasn't merely tired. I was emotionally overwhelmed. The house felt even quieter than before. The silence seemed deeper somehow, as though every room contained questions waiting to be answered. I placed Thomas's letter on the kitchen table, then the documents, then the voice recorder. For nearly an hour, I simply sat there staring at them, trying to process everything, trying to understand who my husband really was. Eventually, I found myself looking at an old photograph hanging near the dining room. Our family, taken 10 years earlier. Thomas stood in the center, one arm around me, the other around Ethan. Rebecca smiling beside us. We looked happy. Because we were happy. At least I thought we were. The realization struck me suddenly. Thomas hadn't spent 25 years living a lie. He had spent 25 years living two truths simultaneously. He loved his family. And he carried responsibility for another family. Those truths weren't mutually exclusive, yet his silence had forced them to collide. Now everyone was paying the price. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. A moment later, someone knocked. Hard. Urgent. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Ethan. The moment I saw him, I noticed something different. He looked anxious, not angry, not defensive, anxious. His eyes immediately scanned my face, as if searching for clues. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I've been trying to call you." "I was busy." His gaze shifted briefly toward the house. "Where were you?" The question immediately irritated me, not because of the words, because of the intent behind them. He wasn't asking out of concern. He was investigating. I crossed my arms. Why? A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. No reason. Lie. We both knew it. Ethan? His jaw tightened. What? I went to the blue house. The reaction was immediate, too immediate. His face lost colour for just a second. Then he recovered, but I had already seen it. You shouldn't have done that. The words came out sharp, controlled, but sharp. I stared at him. Why not? He looked away. No answer. I took a step closer. Why didn't you tell me you knew about it? Silence. Ethan, finally he sighed. I didn't think it mattered. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. It didn't matter? Aubrey. The use of my first name stopped me cold. He only used it when he wanted distance. Sense. When he wanted control, when he didn't want to sound like a son speaking to his mother. My father made mistakes. There it is. His eyes narrowed. What? Mistakes. The word sounded familiar. Too familiar. As though he had reduced decades of pain and sacrifice into a convenient excuse. I took another step forward. Is that what this is to you? What? A mistake? His expression hardened. I think Dad let guilt control his life. The statement hit me harder than I expected, because part of me had wondered the same thing, yet hearing Ethan say it felt wrong, cruel, different. He spent 25 years helping people. He spent 25 years spending money that belonged to our family. There it was, money, again, always money. Always. I suddenly realized something. We weren't having the same conversation. I was talking about responsibility. Ethan was talking about assets. I was talking about people. He was talking about property. The difference was enormous. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan surprised me. You met Hannah. It wasn't a question, a statement. I nodded. His shoulders slumped slightly, almost as if confirming something he'd feared. What did she tell you? I studied him carefully. For the first time, I wasn't sure whether he was worried about me or worried about himself. Enough. His expression tightened. Mom. No. The word came out stronger than intended. His eyes widened, because in 40 years I had rarely spoken to him that way. Not as a child. Not as an adult. Not ever. I took a deep breath, then asked the question that had been haunting me all day. Why were you so desperate to sell that house? For the first time since arriving, Ethan looked genuinely trapped, cornered, unable to escape. His silence answered before he did. Then he quietly said, because Dad changed the will. There it was. Again. The will. The center of everything. My pulse quickened. What changes? Ethan looked away. I don't know exactly. Don't lie to me. The words stunned both of us, including me, because I had never spoken to my son like that. Never. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something I never expected to see. Fear. Real fear. Then he whispered something that changed everything. He was planning to leave control of everything to you. I froze. Everything. Not Ethan. Not Rebecca. Me. And suddenly, I understood why my son had become so desperate. Because this was never about the blue house. It was about losing power. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor I spoke. The air between us felt heavy, uncomfortable, dangerous. Because after everything I had learned over the past few days, one truth had become impossible to ignore. My son was afraid, not grieving, not confused. Afraid. And fear usually appears when someone believes they are about to lose something important. What do you mean he was leaving everything to me? I asked. Ethan looked away. His jaw tightened. The attorney told him not to make the change. My pulse quickened. Daniel? He nodded. I immediately felt another wave of unease. Daniel Whitmore again. His name kept appearing. Every path seemed to lead back to him. What exactly did Daniel tell him? Ethan shrugged. I wasn't there. Then how do you know? Silence. A mistake. A very revealing mistake, because he couldn't answer without exposing how much he actually knew. Finally, he muttered, I heard them talking once. I stared at him. The explanation sounded weak. Even he knew it. For years, I had been able to tell when Ethan was hiding something. Parents never lose that ability. Children simply assume they do. You're not telling me everything. His eyes narrowed. And you're suddenly trusting strangers over your own family? The accusation hit hard. Because part of me feared it might be true. Not the trusting strangers part. The uncertainty part. Everything I believed had been shaken. Every relationship felt unstable. Every memory carried new questions. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The people hiding information weren't strangers. They were my own family. Ethan. My voice softened. I need honesty. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Regret. Maybe even shame. Then it disappeared. I've told you everything. Lie. We both knew it. Neither of us said it. After another tense silence, Ethan finally left. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it. Exhausted, emotionally drained, heartbroken. Because no matter how angry I became, Ethan was still my son. And realizing your child is capable of disappointing you is a unique kind of pain. A pain few people talk about. The next morning, I arrived at Daniel Whitmore's office 15 minutes early. The building sat in downtown Columbus. Modern, professional, impressive. Daniel had practiced law for more than 30 years. People trusted him, respected him, much like they had respected Thomas. As I stepped into the reception area, I noticed his assistant immediately stand. Mrs. Keller? She smiled warmly. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Of course he was. I had the feeling Daniel had been expecting this meeting for much longer than 24 hours. A minute later, I entered his office. Daniel stood from behind his desk. He looked older than I remembered, not physically, emotionally, as though the past few months had aged him. Aubrey. His voice was gentle, concerned, almost apologetic. I sat down. I'm here. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel sighed. I wish Thomas had told you sooner. The statement immediately caught my attention, not because of what it said, because of what it implied. You knew? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The admission landed heavily. No denial, no excuses, just yes. I stared at him. How long? A long time. Anger rose inside me, not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind that burns slowly. You watched me attend birthday parties. Daniel remained silent. You came to Christmas dinners. Still silent. You sat in my home for years. His eyes dropped. And you never told me. The room became painfully quiet. Finally, he spoke. It wasn't my secret to tell. I hated that answer, because part of me knew it was true, yet another part of me couldn't forgive it. You could have encouraged him. I did. The response came instantly, without hesitation, without preparation. Truth. I could hear it. I argued with him many times. My anger paused, not disappeared, paused. Daniel continued. More times than you know. I studied him carefully. For the first time, I realized he looked tired, genuinely tired, like a man who had spent years carrying information he didn't want. He was afraid. Daniel's voice softened. Thomas was terrified. Of what? Losing you. The answer hurt, because I believed it. I truly did, and that made everything worse. If Thomas had hidden the truth because he didn't care about me, this would have been easier, but he cared too much, and that fear had become its own form of dishonesty. Daniel stood and walked toward a cabinet. When he returned, he carried a thick legal folder. The moment I saw Thomas's name on the cover, my pulse accelerated. The will. Finally. The thing everyone seemed to be orbiting around. Daniel sat back down. then carefully opened the file. Thomas amended his estate plans 7 weeks before he died. 7 weeks. Almost exactly when Hannah said Ethan confronted him. The timing wasn't a coincidence, not anymore. Daniel turned several pages, then slid a document toward me. I stared at it. Official signatures, witnesses, dates. Everything appeared legitimate. What changed? Daniel looked directly at me, then answered, control. The same word Ethan had used. My stomach tightened. Explain. Your previous estate structure divided major decision-making authority between you and Ethan. I frowned. That sounded reasonable, traditional, expected. Daniel continued. The revised structure removed Ethan from that position. I felt my pulse quicken. Completely removed. Not reduced. Removed. Why? Daniel hesitated. The hesitation mattered, because lawyers don't hesitate over facts. They hesitate over painful truths. Finally, he answered. Because Thomas stopped trusting his judgment. The room went silent. My heart sank. Not because I was shocked, because hearing it spoken aloud made it real. A father had lost faith in his son. No parent wants that, no child deserves it. Yet sometimes it happens. Daniel continued. He still loved Ethan. I nodded. I already knew that. He always would. I knew that too. But love and trust aren't always the same thing. The words landed with devastating accuracy. Love and trust aren't always the same thing. I thought about Thomas, about Ethan, about myself, about the blue house. The entire story suddenly seemed built around that one idea. People can love each other deeply and still disappoint each other. Daniel slid another paper toward me. This one made my breath catch. A handwritten statement from Thomas. His final instructions. I immediately recognized the handwriting. The first line alone made my chest tighten. If anything happens to me, Aubrey must have full authority over all major estate decisions. I stared at the page, then continued reading. She has always understood the difference between value and worth. Money measures value. Character measures worth. I closed my eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Thomas. Exactly. Then I reached the final paragraph, and my blood ran cold, because Thomas had written something neither Hannah nor Ethan had mentioned, something entirely new, something unexpected. If Ethan challenges these instructions, Daniel already knows why. I froze. My eyes returned to the sentence. Again. Slowly. Carefully. If Ethan challenges these instructions, Daniel already knows why. My heart began pounding, because that wasn't a casual remark. That was a warning. A deliberate warning. I looked up sharply. Daniel's face had gone pale. For the first time since arriving, he looked nervous. Truly nervous. And suddenly, I knew. There was still something he wasn't telling me. Something significant. Something connected to Ethan. And whatever it was, Thomas had anticipated it before he died. I stared at Daniel. For the first time since walking into his office, I wasn't thinking about the Blue House, or Margaret Carter, or even Thomas. I was thinking about Ethan, because the sentence I had just read changed everything. If Ethan challenges these instructions, Daniel already knows why. Not if he disagrees, not if he becomes upset, if he challenges them. As though Thomas expected it, as though he knew something I didn't. I slowly lowered the document. My pulse echoed in my ears. Daniel? His expression tightened immediately. What did Thomas mean? The room fell silent. Daniel looked away, toward the window, toward the city skyline, anywhere except at me, and in that moment, I knew he understood exactly what Thomas meant. The question was whether he would finally tell me. Daniel. My voice was firmer this time. What aren't you saying? He closed the folder, then folded his hands together. The movement felt deliberate. A man buying time. A man choosing his words carefully. Finally, he sighed. Thomas hoped it would never become relevant. My stomach tightened. Relevant to what? Another pause, then. Ethan's behavior. The answer felt both vague and ominous. I wasn't interested in vague anymore. Not after everything. What behavior? Daniel rubbed his forehead. For a moment he looked far older than 62, more tired, more burdened. Then he spoke. About a year ago, Thomas asked me to review several financial transactions. My pulse quickened. Financial transactions. The words immediately triggered alarm bells. Because after Margaret's story, I had learned that money often revealed truths people preferred to hide. What kind of transactions? Family-related. I frowned. Family-related? Daniel nodded. Specifically involving Ethan. The room felt colder. I sat perfectly still, waiting, listening, trying to prepare myself. Daniel continued. Ethan approached Thomas several times regarding investments. That didn't surprise me. Ethan had always been ambitious, always chasing the next opportunity, the next business idea, the next big payoff. But ambition alone wasn't a crime. What happened? Thomas helped him. Of course he did. Thomas was generous, especially with family. Several times. Again, not surprising. Parents help their children, that's what they do. Then Daniel's expression darkened. But eventually Thomas started asking questions. My stomach tightened. Questions. The kind of questions people ask when something doesn't add up. What questions? The money. I leaned forward. What about it? Daniel opened another section of the file. The sound of paper turning suddenly seemed very loud. Then he removed several documents and placed them on the desk. Bank records, transfer confirmations, loan agreements, pages and pages of numbers. At first glance, none of it meant anything to me. Then Daniel pointed to several highlighted sections. I followed his finger, and slowly, a pattern emerged. Transfers. Repeated transfers, large transfers, over several years, from Thomas to Ethan. My chest tightened. I knew Thomas had helped Ethan financially. I hadn't realized the extent of it. The amounts were far larger than I expected. Far larger. How much? Daniel hesitated, then gave me a number. My breath caught. The figure was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. Not all at once. But still, hundreds of thousands. I stared at the documents, unable to process them. Thomas gave him all this? Daniel shook his head. Not exactly. The distinction immediately caught my attention. What do you mean? Some were gifts. He pointed at one section. Some were loans. Another section. And some. His voice trailed off. The pause frightened me. What? Daniel met my eyes. Some were never properly explained. My pulse accelerated. Not explained. I hated those words. Because unexplained money usually meant trouble. Serious trouble. What are you saying? Daniel inhaled slowly, then answered. I'm saying Thomas became concerned. The room seemed to shrink around me. Concerned. Not suspicious. Concerned. The difference mattered. Because concern comes before suspicion. Concern comes when you still hope there's an innocent explanation. What did Ethan say? Different things. Daniel sounded frustrated. Even now, a year later. He claimed certain investments needed more capital. Daniel turned another page. Then he said there were business delays. Another page. Then unexpected expenses. I recognized the pattern immediately. Changing explanations, moving explanations, the kind that never quite settle, the kind that always need another conversation, another payment, another chance. My stomach twisted, because suddenly I wasn't looking at documents. I was looking at disappointment. The slow, painful disappointment of a father realizing his son might not be telling the truth. Then Daniel handed me another document. This one wasn't financial. It was personal. A letter, written by Thomas, addressed to Daniel, not intended for me, not intended for anyone except his attorney and closest friend. With trembling hands, I began reading. Daniel, if you are reviewing this after my death, then events have unfolded the way I feared they might. The first sentence alone made my chest tighten. I continued. I love my son. Nothing will ever change that. But I can no longer ignore what I see. My vision blurred, not because of tears, because of the sadness, the unbearable sadness. A father writing these words about his child. I forced myself to continue. Ethan has become obsessed with money. Not stability, not security. Money itself. And I fear that obsession is growing stronger. Each sentence felt like another weight being added to my heart. Because I knew Thomas hadn't written those words casually. He had fought against them, resisted them, questioned them for years, yet eventually he had written them anyway. The letter continued, "If I am wrong, I will gladly be remembered as an overprotective father. If I am right, Aubrey must be protected from decisions made under pressure." A tear slipped down my cheek, because suddenly I understood. The change to the will wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rejection. It was protection. Thomas wasn't trying to hurt Ethan, he was trying to protect me. The realization shattered something inside me, because after everything I'd learned about his secrets, I finally understood one truth. Even at the end of his life, Thomas had been thinking about me. Not himself, not his reputation. Me. I lowered the letter. The office was silent. For several moments, neither Daniel nor I spoke. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind. Did Ethan know? Daniel's face immediately told me the answer. Yes. Of course he knew. Perhaps not every detail, but enough. Far too much. He suspected. There it was. The lawyer's version of honesty. Not a lie. Not the complete truth, either. He suspected, I repeated. Daniel nodded. Thomas confronted him several times. My pulse quickened. Confronted him? Yes. Another piece of the puzzle. Another conversation I had never known existed. Thomas and Ethan, father and son, arguing behind closed doors. Not just about the blue house. Not just about the will. About trust. About honesty. About money. The room felt unbearably heavy. Then Daniel quietly said something that made my heart stop. Aubrey, there's one more thing. I almost laughed. There was always one more thing. Always. What now? Daniel reached into the file one final time, then removed a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front. Again. Another envelope. Another secret. Another message from beyond the grave. But this time, it wasn't from Thomas. It was from Ethan. I stared at it, completely stunned. What is this? Daniel swallowed, then answered. He left it with me 6 months ago. A chill ran through my entire body. 6 months ago, long before Thomas died, long before the funeral, long before the blue house. I looked at the envelope, then back at Daniel. Why? His answer sent a wave of dread through me. Because Ethan believed there was a chance you would eventually need to know the truth. I stared at the envelope. For several long seconds I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even breathe properly. My name was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting, not Thomas's, not Daniel's, Ethan's. The same son who had spent weeks trying to keep me away from the blue house. The same son who had pressured Hannah. The same son Thomas no longer trusted with major decisions. And yet somehow, 6 months before Thomas died, Ethan had left a sealed letter with Daniel, a letter intended for me. The contradiction made no sense. If Ethan was hiding things, why leave a letter? If he was innocent, why keep it secret? Nothing fit together. Nothing. What is in it? I asked. Daniel shook his head. I never opened it. I studied him carefully. For once, I believed him. Lawyers break many stereotypes, but attorney-client confidentiality is not usually one of them. Thomas knew about this. Daniel nodded. Eventually. My pulse quickened. Eventually. After Ethan left it here. I looked down at the envelope. Every instinct told me to open it immediately. Yet another part of me hesitated. Because every envelope I'd opened so far had changed my life. Thomas's letter, Margaret's records, the estate documents. Each one had shattered another illusion. What if this one did the same? What if this one shattered the last illusion I had left? Daniel seemed to sense my struggle. You don't have to read it now. I laughed softly, a sad laugh. At this point, what's one more secret? Slowly, I broke the seal. Inside were several handwritten pages. The date at the top immediately caught my attention. 6 months earlier. Exactly as Daniel had said. I began reading. Mum, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong, I frowned. That wasn't the opening I expected. Not at all, I continued. There are things happening that Dad refuses to see. Things he doesn't want to believe. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right, someone needs to protect you. My heartbeat accelerated. Protect me? From what? I read further. Dad thinks this is all about money. It isn't. Not entirely. The sentence stopped me. Not entirely. What did that mean? I continued. The people connected to what happened 25 years ago never completely disappeared. Some of them stayed close. Much closer than Dad realized. A chill ran through me. I looked up at Daniel. His face had gone pale. Very pale. Suddenly, I wasn't reading a letter anymore. I was reading a warning. I continued. Several months ago, I discovered information I wasn't supposed to find. Records, emails, conversations, things that didn't make sense. At first, I thought Dad was being manipulated. Then I started wondering whether someone was manipulating all of us. My pulse thundered. Manipulating us? Who? The next page answered part of that question. Not directly, but enough. The name appeared 3 times. Charles Whitmore. I froze. The same name from Margaret's binder. The same name connected to the original scandal. The same man who shared Daniel's last name. I slowly lowered the letter. Charles Whitmore. Daniel closed his eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he nodded. My father. The words landed like a bomb. His father. Of course. Whitmore. The same surname. The connection had been sitting in front of me the entire time. I just hadn't seen it. Suddenly, dozens of questions exploded in my mind. Daniel's involvement, his silence, his knowledge of the past. Everything looked different now. You knew. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded. Yes. The room felt smaller, tighter, more dangerous. You knew your father was involved. Yes. I stared at him, trying to determine whether I should feel angry, betrayed, suspicious. Instead, I felt exhausted, so unbelievably exhausted. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel looked genuinely pained. Because my father's mistakes weren't mine. The answer wasn't unreasonable, but it wasn't satisfying either. My father spent years regretting what happened. I almost laughed. Everyone in this story seemed to be regretting something. Thomas regretted trusting the wrong person. Margaret regretted speaking up. Daniel regretted remaining silent. And now Ethan apparently regretted something too. The tragedy was overwhelming. I looked back at the letter, then continued reading. Mom, if anything happens to Dad, don't assume you're hearing the full story, especially from people who were there the first time. The warning made my stomach tighten, because it was vague, dangerously vague. The kind of statement that creates more questions than answers. Then I reached the final page, the final paragraph, and suddenly everything changed. I found documents suggesting someone attempted to transfer ownership interests connected to the Blue House years ago. The attempt failed. Dad never found out, or at least I don't think he did. I don't know who was responsible, but if anything happens to Dad before he learns the truth, be careful who you trust. The letter ended there. No explanation. No proof, just a warning. A warning written 6 months before Thomas died. I slowly lowered the pages. The office felt completely silent. What does this mean? I asked. Daniel rubbed his forehead. For the first time since I'd met him decades ago, he looked lost, truly lost. I don't know. The answer sounded honest, and somehow that frightened me more than any lie. Because if Daniel didn't know, then no one did, at least not yet. I thought about Ethan. For days I'd viewed him as the antagonist, the greedy son, the selfish son. The son obsessed with inheritance, and perhaps some of that was true. But now another possibility emerged. What if he had also discovered something real? What if beneath all the anger and ambition, there had been genuine concern? The possibility unsettled me, because it meant the situation was more complicated than I'd believed. Again, always more complicated. Daniel suddenly leaned forward. "Aubrey," I looked up. "There is something you need to know before the estate meeting tomorrow." My pulse quickened. The estate meeting. I had almost forgotten. The formal reading, the family gathering, the moment everything would become public. "What?" Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Ethan filed a legal challenge this morning." The words hit me like ice water. "What? He is contesting Thomas's changes?" I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. After everything, the letters, the promises, the guilt, the truth. Ethan had decided to fight anyway, not later, not eventually, now, immediately. And then Daniel delivered the final blow. He isn't just challenging the will. A terrible feeling formed in my chest. "What else?" Daniel looked directly into my eyes. "He is claiming you're no longer capable of managing the estate yourself." The room seemed to spin. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. Me? His own mother? Then reality settled in. Heavy, cold, unavoidable. Ethan wasn't simply fighting for money anymore. He was challenging my competence, my judgment, my independence, everything. And suddenly, I realized the battle Thomas feared had finally begun. For several moments, I couldn't speak. I simply sat there staring at Daniel. The words repeated in my head again and again. He is claiming you're no longer capable of managing the estate yourself. My own son. The little boy I once held through nightmares. The teenager I defended when teachers misunderstood him. The young man whose wedding I helped pay for. That son. The same son who used to call me whenever life became difficult. Now he was trying to convince others that I couldn't be trusted to make decisions. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had discovered about Thomas, because Thomas was gone. Ethan wasn't, and somehow that made it hurt more. "On what grounds?" I finally asked. Daniel sighed. "He claims you've been emotionally compromised since Thomas's death." I almost laughed. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. "Emotionally compromised?" His expression remained serious. "He's arguing that grief has affected your judgment." I stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Outside, people moved through their ordinary lives. Cars passed, pedestrians crossed intersections. The world continued exactly as it always had. Meanwhile, my family was falling apart. The irony was almost unbearable. I folded my arms. "So his position is that I'm incapable of managing my own affairs?" "Essentially." I turned back toward Daniel. "And does he have any evidence?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation worried me. "What?" He submitted statements. My pulse quickened. "From whom?" He opened the file, then frowned. The expression immediately told me I wasn't going to like the answer. "Several people." My stomach tightened. "Who?" "Business associates." I exhaled sharply. Of course. People connected to Ethan. People who knew him. People who likely benefited from supporting his version of events. Then Daniel continued. "And one family member." The room suddenly felt colder. "Rebecca?" Daniel nodded. The disappointment hit me immediately, not as deeply as Ethan's betrayal, but deeply enough. Rebecca, my daughter, my sensible daughter, my peacemaker, the one person I believed would stay neutral. "What exactly did she say?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Nothing malicious." I waited. "She stated that you've been under significant emotional stress." I closed my eyes briefly. Rebecca wasn't trying to hurt me. I knew that. But good intentions often create terrible outcomes. She had probably believed she was being honest, responsible, balanced, not realizing how her words could be used. I sat down again, suddenly exhausted. "So what happens now?" Daniel's expression softened. We fight it. The certainty in his voice surprised me. You sound confident. I am. For the first time all day, a small sense of relief appeared, because Daniel wasn't speaking like a worried attorney, he was speaking like a man who already knew the outcome. Why? He smiled faintly. Because Ethan underestimated something. I frowned. What? You. The answer caught me off guard. Daniel continued. For weeks, you've been uncovering information. I listened. You've reviewed legal documents. Another point. You've conducted independent research. Another. You've connected facts and identified inconsistencies. Another. His smile grew slightly. Frankly, Aubrey, you're demonstrating the exact opposite of incompetence. Despite everything, I almost laughed. It was the first genuinely encouraging thing anyone had said to me in days. Then Daniel's expression became serious again. The bigger problem isn't the legal challenge. What is? The estate meeting. My stomach tightened. Of course, tomorrow. The meeting where everything would become public. The meeting where Ethan would almost certainly create conflict. The meeting where Rebecca would learn the truth. The meeting where years of hidden history would finally collide. What should I expect? Daniel leaned back. A fight? His honesty startled me. No sugarcoating, no legal jargon, just the truth. A fight. And deep down I knew he was right. The next afternoon, the conference room felt suffocating. The large oak table was surrounded by familiar faces. Some family, some legal professionals, some people connected to Thomas's affairs. Everyone looked tense. Everyone. Rebecca arrived first. The moment she saw me, she stood. Mom. Her voice carried genuine concern. I immediately realized something. She didn't know. Not really. She had no idea how her statement had been used, no idea what Ethan was planning, no idea how far things had gone. I hugged her tightly. For a brief moment, I simply held my daughter. Because after everything that had happened, I needed to remember there was still goodness somewhere in my family. Then Ethan arrived. The atmosphere changed instantly. He looked confident, prepared, determined. Not like a grieving son, like a man entering a negotiation. The distinction made me sad, very sad. He took his seat across from me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Everything that needed saying had already been said. The room gradually filled. Finally, Daniel stood. The meeting began. He reviewed procedural details, estate information, administrative matters, the usual legal formalities. Then he reached the section everyone had been waiting for, Thomas Keller's final instructions. The room became silent, painfully silent. Daniel opened the file, then began reading. As Thomas directed, all primary authority regarding the estate shall be vested exclusively in Aubrey Keller. The reaction was immediate. Ethan's jaw tightened. Rebecca looked surprised. Several others exchanged glances. Daniel continued. No co-administrator shall be appointed unless requested by Aubrey Keller herself. My pulse quickened. There it was. Exactly as Hannah had described. Exactly as Thomas intended. Then Daniel paused. Before continuing, there is also an attached statement from Thomas Keller regarding the reasoning behind these changes. I froze. A statement. This wasn't in the documents I'd already seen. Daniel unfolded another page, then began reading aloud. If this statement is being read, then I am no longer here to explain these decisions myself. The room became completely still. Thomas's words seemed to fill the space. I felt tears forming immediately. Daniel continued. My children are adults. I love them both deeply. However, the person I trust most to act with fairness, patience, and integrity is my wife, Aubrey. My heart tightened. Across the table, Rebecca lowered her gaze. Daniel kept reading. Aubrey has spent her life putting people before herself. She sees value where others see inconvenience. She sees responsibility where others see burden. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not because the words were flattering, because they sounded exactly like Thomas. Exactly. Then Daniel reached the final paragraph, the one that changed everything. If anyone questions Aubrey's ability to manage this estate, understand that I made these decisions with full knowledge of every relevant fact, including actions taken by individuals who placed financial gain above family loyalty. The room exploded into silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. Everyone understood the implication. Everyone. My eyes moved toward Ethan. For the first time since entering the room, uncertainty crossed his face. Real uncertainty. Not anger, not arrogance. Uncertainty. Because Thomas had anticipated this months before his death. Perhaps longer. Then something unexpected happened. Rebecca stood, slowly, emotionally, and looked directly at her brother. "Ethan," her voice trembled, "what have you done?" The question hung in the room, heavy, unavoidable, and for the first time Ethan didn't seem to have an answer. Meanwhile, I realized something important. The legal battle wasn't truly about winning anymore. Thomas had already won, because he had left behind something stronger than money, the truth. And the truth was finally catching up with everyone, including our family. The silence after Rebecca's question felt endless. "What have you done?" No one moved. No one spoke. The entire room seemed frozen in place. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan looked genuinely shaken. Not angry, not defensive. Shaken. His confidence had disappeared. The carefully constructed arguments, the legal challenge, the pressure, the certainty. All of it seemed to crumble beneath the weight of Thomas's final words. Rebecca remained standing. Tears filled her eyes. She looked from Ethan to me and back again. "I trusted you." Her voice broke. The pain in it cut deeper than any accusation. Because disappointment from a sibling is different than disappointment from a parent. It's more personal, more immediate. Ethan lowered his gaze. For several moments he said nothing. Then he quietly spoke. "I wasn't trying to hurt Mum." The statement hung in the air, partially true, partially false, like so much of what had happened. Rebecca stared at him. "Then what were you trying to do?" No answer, because there wasn't a good one, at least not one that would survive the truth. Eventually, Daniel ended the meeting. The legal process would continue, the challenge would move forward. But everyone in the room understood something important. The foundation of Ethan's argument had already been weakened. Thomas had anticipated it, prepared for it, documented it. And that mattered a great deal. 3 weeks later, the challenge officially collapsed. Not because of one dramatic courtroom moment, not because of some shocking revelation. Because the facts simply didn't support Ethan's claims. The evidence showed I was fully capable of managing the estate. The records supported Thomas's decisions. The documentation was overwhelming. Eventually, Ethan's attorneys withdrew their objections, just like that. The fight was over. Legally, at least. Emotionally was another matter. Some wounds don't heal because a judge signs paperwork. Some wounds require much longer. A month later, Rebecca came to visit. We sat together on the back porch, the same porch where Thomas and I had spent countless summer evenings. The same porch where we'd watched our children grow up. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Rebecca finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She wiped away tears. "I should have asked more questions." The guilt in her voice was obvious, painful, real. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You didn't know." "But I should have." Maybe, maybe not. The truth was more complicated. All of us had missed things. All of us had believed versions of reality that felt comfortable. Thomas, me, Rebecca, even Ethan. Sometimes families don't fall apart because people are evil. Sometimes they fall apart because people stop talking, honestly. Rebecca squeezed my hand back. "Do you think Dad would be disappointed in us?" I smiled sadly. "No." She looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because I finally understood something about Thomas. something I had spent months learning. He wasn't perfect either. Rebecca laughed through tears. No, he definitely wasn't. We sat quietly for a moment, then she asked the question I knew would eventually come. What about Ethan? I looked out across the yard. The answer wasn't simple. Nothing about this story had been simple. I still love him, Rebecca nodded. I know. But loving someone doesn't mean pretending they haven't hurt you. That was one of the hardest lessons of my life. Love and accountability can exist together. They must. Otherwise, love becomes permission, and permission becomes damage. 2 months later, I drove back to the Blue House. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place of secrets. It felt like a place of truth, a place where decades of misunderstandings had finally begun to unravel. Hannah greeted me at the door. This time we hugged. Not awkwardly, not cautiously. Like family. Because in a strange way, that's what we had become. Not through blood, through history, through shared pain, through Thomas. Together we walked through the house. The same photographs lined the walls. The same flower boxes decorated the windows. The same sense of warmth remained. Only now I understood what I was seeing. Not evidence of betrayal, evidence of responsibility, evidence of a promise kept. Hannah led me to a small room near the back of the house. I found something. My pulse quickened slightly. After everything we'd discovered, those words still had power. She handed me a photograph. An old one. Very old. I immediately recognized Thomas, young, smiling, standing beside Margaret Carter. Neither of them looked romantic. Neither looked secretive. They looked like two people trying to survive a difficult chapter of life. Then I noticed something else, written on the back. In Margaret's handwriting. I read the words slowly. He never stopped trying to make things right. My vision blurred. Not from sadness, from understanding. For months, I had struggled with one question. Was Thomas a good man? The answer turned out to be more complicated than yes or no. He was a flawed man, a man who made a serious mistake, a man who hurt people, a man who hid the truth. But he was also a man who spent 25 years trying to repair the damage he caused. Both things were true. And maturity, I had learned, means accepting that people can be both. That evening, I visited Thomas's grave. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. I stood there for a long time, holding the photograph, thinking, remembering, grieving. Eventually, I spoke aloud. Not because I expected an answer, because some conversations still need to happen, even after death. You should have told me. The wind moved gently through the trees. I smiled sadly. You really should have. Another long silence. Then I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes after months of tears, the kind that carries forgiveness, not because the pain is gone, because you've finally made peace with it. You made a mess of things, Thomas. More silence. Then, but you loved us. My voice broke, and yet I kept speaking. You loved us the best way you knew how. A tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall. Because grief isn't something we conquer. It's something we learn to carry. And for the first time since the funeral, the weight felt lighter. Not gone. Lighter. I placed the photograph beside his headstone, then whispered the words I never thought I'd be able to say. I forgive you. The wind stirred again, soft, gentle, almost comforting. And somehow that felt like enough. A year later, the Blue House became something new. With Hannah's help, I transformed it into a support centre for older women facing financial hardship, housing instability, and family crisis. Women who felt invisible. Women who felt abandoned. Women who needed a second chance. The same kind of second chance Margaret Carter never received. The same kind of second chance Thomas spent years trying to create. Every time I walked through those doors, I felt both families present. The Kellers, the Carters. Two stories connected by one mistake, one promise, and ultimately, One act of redemption. My marriage was not the perfect marriage I once believed it was, but it wasn't a lie either. It was something far more human, far more complicated, and far more real. In the end, the note I received at Thomas's funeral didn't destroy my marriage. It revealed it. And sometimes, the truth doesn't break your heart. Sometimes, it finally teaches your heart how to heal. Life lesson and closing message. If this story teaches us anything, it's that people are rarely as simple as we want them to be. A good person can make a terrible mistake. A loving spouse can keep painful secrets. A devoted parent can become disappointed in a child. And sometimes the people we judge most harshly are carrying burdens we cannot see. One of the hardest truths about life is that love does not erase consequences. Thomas loved his family. He also made choices that hurt people. Both things were true. Real maturity begins when we stop forcing people into categories of heroes and villains and start recognizing that human beings are often both strong and flawed at the same time. This story is also a reminder that silence has a cost. Secrets don't disappear because we avoid them. They grow, they spread, and eventually, they demand to be faced. But there is hope in that truth too, because healing begins the moment honesty begins. No matter how late, no matter how painful, no matter how many years have passed. And finally, never underestimate your own strength. Aubrey thought her life was falling apart. Instead, she discovered courage she never knew she possessed. The courage to seek truth. The courage to stand alone. The courage to forgive. And the courage to build something beautiful from heartbreak. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you received that note at your spouse's funeral? Could you forgive a secret like Thomas's? Or would the secrecy itself be impossible to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us again for more unforgettable stories about family, truth, forgiveness, and second chances.